We're on Daf Yud Aleph Amud Beis, towards the top of the Amud, 5 lines down from the top, the Tanya. Rabbi Yossi ben Kippar Omer Mishum Rabbi Lazar, Amachse Grushaso min Nesuin, Asura min Erisin Muteris. Now, once a person divorces his wife, on the one hand, it's a great mitzvah to remarry her, but that's only if she didn't get married in the meantime to someone else. And what does it mean that she got married to someone else? We know that marriage, Ishus, is created in 2 stages. One is called Erisin or Kiddushin, and the other is called Nisuin or Chuppah. And Rabbi Yossi in the Brisa says that the only time the Isser of Machse Grushaso kicks in is if she got married in a full marriage, a full Ishus, meaning not only Erisin, but also Nisuin, to a second marriage, second man. Then if he divorces her or he dies, the first husband cannot remarry. However, Mina Erisin, if they only got to the point of Erisin, that's the second marriage, Muteris, you can go back to the first husband. Mishum Shendemar, in the parasha in Kitese, it says, I'll read the whole pasuk, Lo yuchal bailo arishon asher shelcha, lo shuv lekachcha, liosol rishon, achrei asher hu tama. And hu tama means erva or bia, nival. So as long as it was known as Suin, it was just Erisin. Back in the day, they used to separate Erisin from the Suin. In fact, in the case of a first marriage for a woman, they would separate as long as a year. I don't think in this case they separated for a year, but certainly there would be a period of time between Erisin and Suin. And during that time, she lived with her own family. She did not live with him. She wasn't even allowed to be alone with him, secluded, until the chuppah. So up until the chuppah, the assumption is that she did not have a beer relationship with her second husband. It was only Erisin and not Nisuin. So that's the shita of Rabbi Yossi. And now we get to the Chacham. Chachomim omrim achas zu v'achas zu asura. Now the impression you get here is that we're dealing with the Doraisa. This is not Gzeira D'Rabbanan. But as far as the Doraisa is concerned, Machse Grushaso applies even after Erisin. So say the Chacham. Now, in order to appreciate this, we have to go back to the pasuk, but actually we have to rewind to the pasuk before this pasuk, because the previous pasuk says v'yatzami beiso al chavai sol ish acher. Now the emphasis here is on the word v'haisa leish acher, which is called in Aramaic havaya, and havaya means kiddushin even without nisuin. And therefore, when it says in the next pasuk that we read earlier, lo yuchal baila rishon l'shuv l'kachta, it means that she already had havaya, which is kiddushin, with the second husband. And again, all this seems to be doraisa. Elo, mani makayim achrei asher hu tama. What am I going to do with the drasha, the derivation of Rabbi Yossi? After all, it says achra asher hu tama. The reason why lo yuchal baila l'kachta is because hu tama, which means that she had beer. And now we're talking about Erisin. In Erisin, there is no beer. And now the Chacham are going to say that this pasuk achrei asher hu tama should be taken out of context. And it's not the end of the beginning. The beginning is the Isser Machse Grushaso. And the Torah says that you're not allowed to be Machse Grushaso. Then we put a period. And then we start with Achrei Asher Hu Tama. It's a separate independent thought unit. And what's the discussion of that thought unit? L'rabo Sota Shenistera. Now, what happens over here? We mentioned this in passing yesterday, that the process of Sota is a 2-stage process. Number one, there's kinui, in which case the husband says to his wife, don't go into a private place with this man. And then she violates that kinui with stira. You see where the Gemara says, L'rabo sota shenistera. And that means that at what point does she become asura l'bayla? You and I might have said that in order to generate an Isur L'Baila, you need two Eidim. There were two Eidim that she went into a private place, but they didn't see a Bia. And that's why the Torah says, Achrei asher hu tamah, l'rabo sota shenisra, even though it's still up in the air, there's a suffix. You may say it looks very suspicious, but we don't have testimony to the fact that she had this bias ashes speech with the second, with the person about whom she had Kinyan Stira. And the Torah says that her husband is not allowed to remain married to her, because after Kinyan Stira, she's Asura love, and it's called Hutama. Now again, what do you mean Hutama? Hutama means Bia. We don't know that she had Bia. But Hutama means we consider it as if she had Bia, because she violated the Stira and went into a private place, which is called, she violated the Kinui, and she went to a private place which is called Stira. So we now come to the conclusion, and again, I don't know if the conclusion is universally accepted, and even Rabbi Yossi would accept it, but certainly according to the Chachamim, the Torah uses the word hutama to describe a suspicious bia, an assumption based on circumstances and evidence that it looks like she did have bia, and that's also called hutama. And this is called in the fancy language of Shas, raglayim l'dover. You familiar with that phrase? Raglayim l'dover means literally, but it's an idiom. It means there are feet to it. There's something to stand on. And basically, raglayim l'dover is a phrase that's used to describe circumstantial evidence. Like, for example, the Gemara talks about a case of someone who's holding a knife and he's running after someone, and he's about to kill him, and then they go into this tunnel, and they aid him because of the darkness they didn't see. But as soon as they got to the other side of the tunnel, they were able to see the knife inside his body. That the guy was dead. So that's raglayim l'dover. That's considered circumstantial evidence. So the word tuma, according to Chachamim, is not vada. It doesn't mean that we have witnesses, but we have circumstantial evidence. Now, why is the Gemara quoting this machlokes and this brisa? What impact does it have on the discussion that we had about saras sota? It seems that if the Torah upgrades the kini stira of a sota to that of tumah and raglayim l'dover, as if we had Eidim, which we don't, but it's as if we had Eidim, then she should pater up hatzara from chalitza yibum. Why? Because in effect, it's considered as if she was an erva. The tumah itself, which is tumas arayos, and arayos always paters up the tzara from yibum. So when she, the sota, together with a tzara, fall for yibum to the brother, so it means that her husband died without children. So now she falls as a sota. She had a sota, situation of Kinyan Stira. Then her husband died. Now she falls for yibum together with her husband's other wife. Then neither of them will fall for yibum or chalitza, because we upgrade the status of the sota to that of tumah, as if it were vadai that she had this relationship, and therefore she becomes an Arab. So the Gemara says no. The Gemara will refute this proof. And when it says achrei asher hu tamah, those three words, we're not talking about a suffix. We're talking about a case of Eidim, where there were two witnesses who testified that she had this relationship of Eshes Ish. Umay, and when the Chachamim say in the Brisa, as it's quoted, L'rabo soto shenistera, it means nivel. I mean, this is a bit of a stretch. That nistera, when you talk about sota, means nivel. But my correlate nistera, Mishnah bi aliyah nakat. That the Chachamim, whenever possible, and they have to talk about be'ilah, but they want to convey the message, and they can do it without using the word be'ilah, they do so. They look for substitute words, which is called Lashon Nikia. It's a kind of a tznius that they don't want to use explicit terms. So the Chachamim, when they use the term Nistera, what they're really referring to is Nival. And they were aided that she was Nival. Now, what did the Chachamim gain by interpreting the pasuk of Achrei Sharhu Tama as a case where there are Aiden? Again, as far as the machlokas against Rabbi Yossi is concerned, we're not talking about Havaya. 1 second, let me just get the two sheets down. According to Rabbi Yossi, it's Dafka min and Esuin, and you can't prove anything, say the Chachamim, from Achrei Asher Hutama, because that's an independent thought unit and derives from the parsha of the Sot. So don't draw any conclusions about Machzir Gushas and assume that it means after the Suin, which was Rabbi Yossi's conclusion, the Suin meaning beer. No. Avaya is enough. It says, V'yotzav v'hoisal ach. And that itself would engender an Isser of Machzir Gushas. What does the Torah mean when it says Achrei Asher Hutama? It's telling you the law of a Sota. What kind of Sota? So we thought it was Nistera. And the Chiddush is a great, gigantic, fundamental breakthrough, namely that Nistera is equivalent through what we call the mechanism of Raglayim L'Davar, as if we know for sure, and there's evidence clearly that she had Be'ilah. But now it was saying, no, Nistera means Nivala, and it was just Lashon Nikia, but there was two Aiden testified that she had this relationship, then what exactly is the Torah coming to add over? And the Gemara asks this kash, it says, Nivala Tuma Behedrik Sivpa. I mean, we're analyzing now the Parsha Machzir Gushaso in Parshas Ki Teitze. The original Sota Parsha is in Parshas Nasa, in the 5th chapter of Sefer Bamidbar. And the Torah already says over there in the Parsha of Sota, V'nistera v'hi nitma. So why would the Torah repeat the case of a woman, a married woman who had an extramarital affair, and there were two Eidim? That's explicit in the Torah in Parshas Nasa. And now you tell me Ki Teisei, the Torah had to add the words V'hi nitma. For what purpose? Achrei Sharhu Tama. So now the Gemara has to come up with a chidush here in the pasuk Achrei Sharhu Tama. What is the nature and the severity of the prohibition of a husband to have a relationship with his wife who's a sota? If you take a look in Parshas Nasa, you do not get you cannot derive the conclusion that we're talking about a violation of a law. The Torah says, don't. Do we have a chumash here? Maybe I think if we looked in the psukim, it would be a little bit helpful. Any chumash, but it has to have the 5 books or at least the last 2 books. So if you could open up to Bamidbar Hey, also Gid Gimel, and at the same time, to open up to Dvarim Chav Daled, Pasuk Daled. So we're talking about Midbar 5:13 and Deuteronomy 24:4. All right, so let's start with Bamidbar. Can you read it out loud, Steve? I mean, just loud enough that I can hear.
You want the
What's the Gid Gimel, the 13th?
previous one?
All right. always good to have a previous one, right?
ואמרת עליהם איש איש כי תשא אשתו מעלו ומעל שחר איש אותו שיקרא סתרה נעלם מעיני אישה נסתרה היא ועד אין בה היא לא נתפס.
Maybe even a little bit further. I mean, I'm trying. The psukim that you read give me the background. So,
right.
But what's the punchline? What's the final rule of it? Does the Torah spell it out?
I mean, and it just talks about
Can I?
the sota.
Maybe I can. Do you have another chumash, maybe? Or?
והדי האיש אשתו הסכוהן והביא קורבנה
One second. Then the Vashachav is also Shipas Avanel is serving me. So again, I think the thrust of this parsha in Naso is an obligation incumbent upon the Baal to bring his wife for what's called hashkas sota, that she has to drink the main maram, etc., etc. And let's just see. Okay. So if he were to have a relationship with her, and this is all in Torah Shebal Peh, Masechet Sota, he would be undermining the mitzvah of Hashkas Sota, because once she has a relationship with her husband, subsequent to this whole story, then the Mei Marorim are not capable of doing their job. Now the Gemara considers that as what we call a bittul essay, or call it a lav habamachal essay, which is an essay. So his essay, his positive command is to bring his wife, who's a sota, to the Kohen for the parasha for the mitzvah of Hashkas. But nowhere does the Torah give him an explicit lotas, a lav, which we get malchus, if he has a relationship with her, with his wife. But if you open up the Parshas Ki Tetzei, where the Torah says lo yuchal bailo l'shalcha, that's already a lot. Lo yuchal bailo lakachta lo leisha, lashuv lakachta lo leisha. And then it says achrei asher utama. So if you're asking me, according to the Chachamim, achrei asher utama means there are Aiden that she had this relationship. So why did the Torah have to add that in Parshas Ki Tetzei when I already know it from Parshas Naso? The answer is the Torah here wants to set up a law. And that's called in the Gemara's language, lemekem ala bilav. So lo yuchal baila arishon l'shuv l'kachta means that if he has a relationship with her, achrei asher hutama, in a case where we have Eidim and clear-cut absolute testimony that she had this relationship, then he violates a law of lo yuchal, etc., l'kachta. And that's something that we could not derive from Parshas Naso, because nowhere in Parshas Naso does the Torah formulate a law. Again, he has an essay. He's commanded to bring up for Hashkas Sota, but he would not get Malchus if he went ahead and had a relationship with her, even though that undermines the whole process of Mei Merorim. But now that we have this parsha in Ki Tetzei of Achrei Asher Hutama, that goes back to the beginning of the pasuk, Lo Yuchal, etc. L'kachto. Now, what I find a little bit strange about this situation here is that if you take a look at Tosfos we came on the second 4 lines after the top. Came on the lo kasuv la besota is safek amai omar besota de bole bailo b'derech loken. The Gemara says that if he's on the way to bringing her to the Migdash for Hashkas Sota, and he has a relationship with her on the way, he gets Malchus. Also comes to the conclusion that at the end of the day, even in a case of Suffolk, meaning a classic Sota scenario where we don't have Aiden that testify that she had this beer, if he has a relationship with her, he gets Malchus. But all that is a derivation from Achrei Asher Hu Tamah, which appears in the parsha of Machzir Gushaso Liachar Shenises. But I was bothered by a different question. There are 2 scenarios which generate Malchus in a man who has a relationship with his wife. One is when he has a relationship with his former wife after she got married to someone else, and let's say she was divorced, etc., etc. And the other is a case of a husband whose wife had this immoral relationship. And there too, he gets Malchus for having beer with his wife. But yet both Chiyuvei Malchus derive from the same law. It only says Lo Yuchal Loshuv, etc. once in the Torah. And yet it's going to, that Lo Yuchal is going to generate Malchus in 2 different scenarios. One is the scenario of a woman who got a divorce and got married to another man. And the other is a woman who had an immoral relationship with another man. And both, Chiyuv Malchus, if the husband has a relationship with her, derive from the same process. That's what bothered me, because I thought Ein Onshin Elen Ke Mazira means that every Malchus requires its own lot. I'm tempted to think, and I'm not sure if this is valid, that both of these Lavin, both of these Isurim, are really one and the same. And my research would take me to the Rambam in Sefer Mitzvah. I wonder if the Rambam counts these 2 as separate lavim in Taryag or as one lav, because in the Torah it's written as one lav. Now you might ask me, what's the common link between the two lavim? And that is that she had a relationship with another man, whether in the case where she legally had that relationship because she got a divorce from her husband, or in the case where she obviously was guilty of a crime. But in both cases, the Torah says that terminates the relationship and the intimacy between a husband and a wife. For Rabbi Yossi Bar Ben Kippur, so he learns that Achrei Asher Hu Tamah is a reference to Machzir Gushaso Liachar Shenises, because Nitma means Nises. Lav Bisoto Leslo. He doesn't have Lo Yochel Lekachta for a man whose wife had this criminal, immoral relationship that he's not allowed to have beer with her. There's no lav for that. Vafilu Zanai, even though she had Znus al Piedim, meaning she had 2 witnesses, there's no lav that forbids the husband for having a relationship with her. Nami. I'm not sure what the word Nami means here. 1 second, give me a minute. Oh, the Masechet says that Nami means Gamkein Eina Asura Ela Be'Isra say shall be Nitma. Okay, fine. Good. Nami means even in the most extreme case, we have 2 Aiden that she had this nus. His relationship with her would be nothing more than an essay derived from the parsha in Naso. But this parsha is talking about Machzir Gushas Alachar Shenises, and that lav could not serve and function as a lav for the case where there were 2 Adim that she had znus. My timer, what's pressing Rabbi Yossi Bar Kippur and blocking him and making him so inhibited about interpreting Achrei Asher Hu Tamah as referring to the Sota. And the Gemara explains that Havaya ve'ishus ksivva. In other words, with regard to this woman who's Asura al Baila, and the pasuk says, "V'yotza mi beisa v'holcha v'hoisa lish acher." We're talking about Havaya. We're talking about Ishus. And that has nothing to do with the case of Sota, because Sota is not a case which he had to Ishus another man. Now he adds another pasuk. The pasuk says, "Oki amus ha'isha charon asher lekachal lo leisha." The Torah is clearly talking about a case where she was married to another man. That's what it says explicitly. And he died, that other man. Now the first husband wants to be married. So we're not talking about a case of a Sota who had znus. We're talking about a case of a woman who had ishus and was married to another. Boy minei Rav Yehuda mirav Sheshes. Amachzir gushaso mishenises umeis tzarasa ma. So now we're talking about Chayvei Lav. And until this point in the Gemara, we've always assumed that Chayvei Lavin will have a Zika and they'll require Chalitza without Yibum. And that would have no impact on the Tzara, because the Lav is only on her, not on her Tzara. So here we're talking about a case of Machzik Ushasa Misha Nises, and her husband could no longer, legally marry her, but he went ahead and he married her. I remember in my youth a case that this happened, actually. I remember a case of a Kohen who was married to a Grusha, and he went up to Duch. Again, in America back then, everything went. So anyway, this man remarried his ex-wife after she was married to another husband, and now he dies without children. And the Gemara seems to assume that in such a case, there definitely would be a mitzvah of yibum, or at least a mitzvah of chalitza, meaning there would be a zika, because he just violated a law, and the ishus is a perfectly good ishus. So he has a diagram. I'm not sure why you need a diagram for this, but you know what? If there's a diagram, there must be a reason why he has it. Let's go through. Ruven v'Shimon achiv, v'nasa Shimon es Sarah v'es Rivka. Ireish Shimon es Sarah, v'holcha v'niseis liyitzchak, u'meis Yitzchak, the avar Shimon al alav shal masik v'shaso v'hichzir es Sarah, u'meis Shimon b'lo banim, v'naflu nashav. And so again, Shimon is married to Sarah and Rivka. He's legally married to Rivka, but illegally married to Sarah. V'naflu nashav, so his two wives, that's Rivka and Sarah and Rivka, lifnei Ruven li'ibur. Okay. So far, I don't see any great chidushim here, but let's read the small print if we can. Hooray, the Rabbi Yossi ben Kippur, Steyan Pturos Michalitza v'Yibum. Now I didn't cap where the Gemara was taking us. You remember that we said earlier that the word hutama means beer. And we have a hekesh between this word tuma in this context, a woman who now got married to a second husband, and tuma in the Parsha Barayos. And that upgrades the status of Machzik Mushaso to that of an Erev. 1 second, I don't get it. This Erev has nothing to do with Reuven. The Ish is a valid issue. Why they produce Michal Ishum? It's as if he's married to an Erev. It's really fascinating when you think about it. On the one hand, we validate his marriage because Kedusha tells us Lav, but on the other hand, the Torah considers this Lav as if it was an Erev. So for all intents and purposes, the Torah is telling you to be married Achos Ishta. Lachain Dinok HaRayos. And in what context, or shall we say, for what nafkamina is the Torah considering her as an Erev to Shimon, meaning Tumah? It's relevant to Yibum, that there won't be any Yibum over here. Was Dina Arayo, Sheptura, Pochos, Sora, Michalitza V'Yibum. Confused over. If Shimon married an Erev, so do we know that there's no Yibum in such a case? That sounds new to me. Again, if she married an Erev, there's no Tfisus Kedusha, so you can't talk about Yibum. But Lu Yitzur, a man would marry an Erva and there would be Tfisus Kedusha. How can you imagine such a thing? Here's the case. Why wouldn't there be Yibum? I guess the Torah is telling you that there's no Yibum because it's as if he married an Erva. Imagine that there would be no Tfisus Kedusha. No, it's saying that there's no Yibum at all.
Right. We would not expect it from the Arab Torah.
No, I would have expected it from the Arab as well. Because again, what relationship does this woman have to Reuven? Shimon died. He gets pots, before he died, right? Before he died, maybe he died after they gave 39 lists. Died in Bezdin. But okay, he's a scoundrel and he's a criminal. But why doesn't his wife fall for you? Well, what's our relation to Reuven? The 15 Arayas in our Mishnah are Reuven's Arayas. He's the Miyavim, you know what I'm saying?